There's a kind of pain that it doesn't leave bruises, no black eyes or anything like that, no visible scars. It's like slow erosion. You don't really notice what's being chipped away until you're standing in the rubble of your own identity, wondering how you got there. It is a profound, terrifying disorientation. You look around the landscape of your life and realize the person you used to be, the personality you spent decades building, is just entirely gone, replaced by this hollowed-out shell that really only exists to manage someone else's moods, and that erasure of self that is the absolute core of our deep dive. Today, I'm going to be dismantling the hidden psychological mechanics of narcissistic abuse syndrome, which is such an important topic. It really is. Now, while that's a non-medical term, the chronic anxiety, the paralyzing fear, and that shattered self-worth it describes are incredibly real. I mean, this is what happens to the human brain and body after prolonged, inescapable exposure to a destructive personality pattern. This is total psychological warfare. So I am going to decode the exact architecture of this trap step by step, and more importantly, how to recognize when you are finally breaking free. Because breaking free is entirely possible. In fact, a bit later in this deep dive, we're going to reveal the single surprising moment that proves you are finally healing. And oddly enough, it doesn't involve some massive confrontation or a dramatic exit. It involves a very specific silent head nod. That moment of realization is totally the tipping point. But, to understand how you get to that quiet victory, we first have to understand the sheer cognitive load required to break down a person's reality in the first place. Right? Because this isn't just someone having a selfish day. Not at all. It's a calculated, persistent tactic for absolute control. It's like having someone slowly rewrite the code of reality until your own software just crashes. The abuser demands to be the sole author of your reality. So let's talk about how that authorship begins. Because it doesn't start with cruelty. No. If someone walked up to you on a first date and just insulted your character, you'd leave, you'd run. So the trap requires a mirage. I mean, we all know the term love bombing, the grand gestures, the constant texts, the sudden declarations that you're soulmates, right? But we really need to examine is what that actually does to your brain chemistry. Because this isn't just romance. What is it then? It's the establishment of an impossible baseline. Think about the neurological impact when you are flooded with that level of intense, rapid emotional bonding. Your brain is just absolutely swimming in dopamine and oxytocin, like a high. Chemically, it is a high. They are engineering a flawless, idealized version of themselves, and they're mirroring your deepest desires back to you. They want you to become physiologically addicted to this dynamic. And part of that addiction involves future faking, doesn't it? Oh, absolutely. Future faking is huge because they aren't just complimenting you in the present. They are aggressively mapping out a shared future, making these elaborate promises about marriage or having kids or, starting a business together just to keep you invested. Future faking anchors your hope to a fictitious timeline. When they paint this vivid, detailed picture of a beautiful life together, your brain begins to process those future events as a guaranteed return on your emotional investment. You lock into that vision, which means when the mask eventually slips, when the cruelty begins, you aren't just fighting to save the present relationship. You're fighting to save the entire future you were promised. So that makes you exponentially more forgiving. Precisely. Okay, I have to pause here because this brings up a massive debate regarding intent. When they are showering you with attention, planning these fake vacations, flooding your brain with dopamine, are they consciously thinking, I'm going to use this against them later? Or do they actually believe their own hype in the moment? That is always the hardest question for people to reconcile. I bet the most accurate way to view it is as an instinctual survival mechanism for their own fragile ego. Whether it's a highly conscious plot or just a subconscious drive, it functions unequivocally as a strategy. So they might not have a master plan drawn out on a whiteboard, but they are desperately trying to fill an internal void. And to do that, they need an endless supply of adoration. They establish that high early on because they intuitively know that starving you of that praise later is how they establish ultimate power, because you'll tolerate almost anything to get that flawless version of them back. And while you're entirely distracted by this beautiful mirage, the isolation protocols begin, and it's incredibly insidious. It's not like they just lock the door. No, it's a subtle chipping away. Yeah, a passing comment about how your best friend seems secretly jealous of your success, or they start picking massive, draining fights right before you're supposed to go to a family gathering, until eventually the emotional toll of the argument is so exhausting that you just stop going. You choose the isolation just to avoid the drama. That illusion of choice is wild to me. It's the darkest part of the isolation phase. They make it feel like it was your decision to pull away. Slowly, they engineer this void where they are the voicey voice left in your life. So you have no reality checks left. You become entirely dependent on their version of events, which sets the stage for the actual of your reality. The gaslighting, which is a term everyone uses now, denying reality to make someone feel crazy. But what truly stands out in this deep dive is the actual cognitive load this puts on the victim. It's immense. It's not just lying. It's like someone hacking into your computer and subtly changing the timestamps on your files. I love that metaphor. Like, at first you think it's just a glitch, but eventually you realize you can't trust your computer's clock at all. You remember a conversation with crystal clarity, and they will look you dead in the eye without a flinch and swear it never happened. The timestamp metaphor is perfect because gaslighting forces your brain into a state of chronic cognitive dissonance. Your brain is burning massive amounts of glucose, trying to reconcile two completely opposing realities: your actual memory versus their absolute conviction. Over time, your brain just becomes exhausted. It is literally easier from an energy conservation standpoint to just surrender and accept their version of reality than to constantly fight a psychological war over every single detail. So they train you to rely on their perception instead of trusting your own mind. They do, because you can never win anyway. The moving goalposts telling you to be more independent. But the second you see friends, they accuse you of neglecting the relationship. You are in a manufactured, unwinnable state. The rules change based on whatever mood they need to justify that day, and the confusion generated by those moving goalposts. That's the point, isn't it? The more confused you are, the harder you try to solve the puzzle. You are pouring all your mental energy into trying to please a person who has fundamentally decided they will never, ever be satisfied. Which leads to what might be the most devastating phase we uncovered. After enough time in that unwinnable state, you stop needing them to criticize you. You take over the job. You develop this incredibly cruel inner critic. You start talking to yourself the exact same way they talk to you, losing all your self-compassion, second-guessing every tiny decision. It's like you've been placed on trial for a crime you didn't commit, but they've manipulated you into volunteering to be your own harsh judge and jury. Taking over the abuser's job is the ultimate sign that the psychological infection has taken hold. What is happening fundamentally is that your own empathy is being weaponized against you. Wait, I struggle with this idea, this weaponized empathy. If someone is highly empathetic, if they have a high emotional intelligence, shouldn't their radar protect them from this? I mean, why does being empathetic make you a worse judge of this specific character? That is a brilliant question. The thing is, your radar does catch something. It catches their hidden, deeply buried pain. Oh, wow. People with high emotional intelligence are naturally attuned to the unexpressed emotions of others. And in these toxic dynamics, the abuser is often carrying a massive unconscious reservoir of internal shame and self-loathing. But they can't handle feeling that. Their ego won't allow them to feel it, so they project it outward onto you. And the empathic person energetically absorbs all of that projected self-loathing because they are trying to heal the abuser. So you act as a sponge for their toxicity. It quite literally becomes part of your own subconscious programming. You carry their sickness, genuinely believing it is your own fundamental flaw. That is such a chilling realization. You're walking around carrying their self-hatred, convinced you are the broken one. And this mental exhaustion, it doesn't just stay in your head. No, the brain controls the body. And when the brain is under constant psychological siege, the body sounds the alarm. Yep, the trauma eventually overflows into absolute physical chaos because the nervous system cannot distinguish between a physical threat and a psychological one. So your body reacts as if it's being hunted by a predator, even though the predator is just sitting next to you on the couch watching television, which puts you in a state of chronic hypervigilance. I mean, walking on eggshells doesn't even begin to cover it. Your nervous system is locked in a sympathetic fight or flight response 24/7. You're constantly monitoring their micro expressions, overanalyzing every single word you say to avoid an unpredictable rage episode. And we're not talking about arguments over big life decisions here. This is explosive, punishing rage over something as small as forgetting to buy milk or breathing too loudly, or because the danger never truly ends. Your adrenal glands are constantly pumping cortisol and adrenaline into your bloodstream. And that's meant to be a short-term survival mechanism, not a daily lifestyle. And the physical toll of that is catastrophic. Insomnia, daily panic attacks, rapid weight loss, chronic fatigue, a compromised immune system. You are literally getting sick, very sick. And because living in that physical and emotional reality is so intolerably painful, you naturally start looking for an escape hatch, right? You start self-medicating, right? Turning to food, alcohol, shopping, workaholism, anything. To cope with an intolerable reality, you have to numb yourself. You do, because feeling the full brunt of the cognitive dissonance and the terror is simply too painful for the conscious mind to bear. One question naturally comes up at this point. If your body is literally shutting down and making you sick, why is it so incredibly hard to just walk away? Well, to an outsider, it looks like a choice, but the answer lies in the neuroscience of a phenomenon called trauma bonding. Trauma bonding? It is vital to separate this from the concept of love. A trauma bond is a physiological and emotional addiction forged in the fires of inconsistent care. Inconsistent care? You mean like the cycle of extreme cruelty followed by a sudden flash of affection? Precisely. Cycles of abuse followed by fleeting, unpredictable moments of kindness, apologies, or a brief return of that initial love-bombing persona. Like intermittent reinforcement? Exactly like that. It acts on the dopamine receptors in your brain exactly the same way a slot machine does. If a slot machine paid out every time, it would be boring, right? And if it never paid out, you'd walk away. But because the payout is entirely unpredictable, it creates a compulsive, addictive loop. Your brain gets wired to the chaos. You become biologically addicted to the massive relief that washes over you. When the abuser finally stops screaming and shows you a tiny shred of humanity, you end up clinging to crumbs and calling it a meal. Clinging to crumbs and calling it a meal. That completely reframes the shame victims feel about staying. It's not weakness. It's a chemical dependency engineered by the abuser. It really is. So how do you break a chemical dependency on a person? I mean, to finally shatter that trauma bond, you have to wake up to the sheer absurdity of their tactics. You have to realize it was never about you. You have to see it as a performance. Yes, the theatre of the absurd. Because trying to reason with this behaviour feels like trying to have a logical debate with a flat earther. It completely defies the laws of reality and human accountability. The most glaring act in this theatre is projection. Projection is wild. They will loudly accuse you of exactly what they are doing. If they are lying, they call you a liar. If they are cheating, they accuse you of infidelity. Projection is a literal defense mechanism against self-psychic death for this type of personality. Remember, they are fiercely protecting a false, flawless self-image. To admit they did something wrong, to feel genuine guilt, would shatter their delusion of perfection. So they take their own deep-seated flaws, hand them to you, and demand you wear them. It is a confession disguised as an accusation. And if that doesn't keep you off balance, they bring in triangulation, right? Bringing other people into the dynamic, like constantly bringing up an ex or a coworker, making you feel like you're competing for affection. Triangulation introduces a phantom third party into the dynamic to dilute your power, because if it's just the two of you, you might hold them accountable. But if you feel easily replaceable, you're much less likely to demand respect. You're too busy fighting the imaginary rival. And God forbid you actually do hold them accountable. Like you confront them about a lie with undeniable proof. Within minutes, they deploy the ultimate dodge, playing the victim. The pivot to victimhood is masterful. It is. Suddenly they are crying about how hard their life is, forcing you to comfort them instead of holding them accountable. And genuine apologies don't exist. They only ever say, "I'm sorry you feel that way," which isn't an apology. It places the blame entirely back on your emotional reaction, totally unmoored from reality. When you don't know who you are anymore, they just step in and decide your identity for you. They project their flaws onto you to protect that flawless image. They make you the villain to keep their fantasy. This leads to the ultimate question: how do you know you are finally escaping the fog? What is the tangible proof that you're making real strides? The ultimate sign of healing does not look like a dramatic Hollywood confrontation where you finally tell them off. It looks like a moment of profound, unshakable internal quiet. The day you stop trying to figure out if their lies about you are true. Yes, you stop playing the detective. You resign from the job entirely. You no longer spend hours scrolling through old text to prove you didn't say something cruel. You stop asking your therapist, "Am I really too sensitive?" You stop seeking external proof to counter their delusions. Because you finally know yourself well enough to know with absolute certainty that they are lying. And more importantly, you no longer care. And that brings us to the head nodded, the visual that ties it all together. Think of the character Jim from the show The Office. When someone does something completely ridiculous or unhinged, Jim doesn't argue. He doesn't try to teach them logic. He just looks at the camera with that tight-lipped, silent nod, right? He acknowledges the absurdity without engaging with it for a single second. And that's what you do. You recognize you are in their theatre of the absurd. You just nod politely as if they are speaking a language you don't understand. And you go back to your business. You no longer give in to their distortions. That detachment is the ultimate victory. The manipulative things they say are no longer plausible to your brain. You have rejected their programming. Reclaiming your identity means deciding you deserve better and holding space for yourself in quiet solitude without needing their validation. You stop fighting for your reality and you just start living in it again. You get your time back, you get your mind back, the erosion stops and the rebuilding begins. We have covered the silent erosion of identity, the chemical trap of love bombing, the devastating physical toll of trauma bonding, and the power of simply no longer believing the lies. But I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over, building on the reality that your physical body has been bearing the brunt of this war. If your body has been keeping the score all these months or years, absorbing every unspoken tension and every twisted truth, what is it trying to tell you right now, in the silence, now that you finally know how to listen?